Hello everyone, welcome to MES e-learning channel. In this video, we are going to take up the topic of sampling. Sampling is a part of research process. We all know what is research. So research is basically the part of investigation. It's a search for knowledge. So one of the process which is integral for the purpose of conducting research is sampling. So let's try to understand what is sampling. So sampling is nothing but the process of finding out sample from a particular population. Now this sample can be understood as a subset from a larger group. The subset can be understood as a sample, whereas the larger group can be understood as a population. So the results from gathering the sample from a larger group is called as sampling. So if you can see, there are certain terms attached to the particular concepts. First one is population. First, we need to understand what is population. For the purpose of conducting research, we need to identify the population from whom we are going to derive our sample from. So this population can be an individual, it can be an item or an object under study which better suits the characteristics of research. So first the researcher will have to identify the population. The next is the element. The element term basically refers to the sampling unit. The sampling unit is nothing but one unit from a population. This one unit is a defined characteristics which we are going to take up for the purpose of research study. Now this next is sampling. As I said earlier, sampling is the process of selection of a subset from a larger group. Sampling frame. Now from where do we can get the sample? A sampling frame will have to be drawn up by the researcher. This sampling frame will constitute of listing of population. Okay, this listing of population would be nothing but a source from where we can draw up our sample. So sampling frame would be very much helpful for the researcher to determine also from where they can take up their sample, on what basis they can take up their sample from a particular population. Now this is how what a sampling can look like. Now if you see the image, the collection of the individuals together in the image can be understood as a population. Not necessarily always an individual would be taken under study for the purpose of research. They can be an item as well as an object. Anything which will be taken up for the research study, we will have to first determine their population. From that particular population, a sample has to be drawn. So better suited up sample for the research study will be drawn from the population. Next is the types of sampling. Mainly there are two main types of sampling, probability and non-probability sampling. So probability sampling is a process in which the sample has been taken based on equal opportunity to all the population. Under probability sampling, the characteristics are well determined of the sample to be chosen, and each item of a population or an individual will have an equal opportunity to be a part of the sample. Next, second is non-probability sampling. As contradictory to probability sampling, non-probability sampling is an undetermined sampling process wherein the samples are not determined pre-hand. They are not predefined. They are taken on a random basis without any further criteria attached to it. Now there are further subtypes under probability sampling. The very first type is simple random sampling, then systematic sampling, cluster and stratified sampling. Under non-probability sampling, we have convenience sampling, accidental sampling, judgmental, quota and snowball or chain referral sampling. So we shall now look into further in depth of all these types of sampling. Coming to simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is a process in which the individuals or items are selected based on luck or pure coincidence by chance. The luck plays an important role for the items or individuals to be selected. Herein, the probability is drawn up in such a way that the individuals or items can only have one chance to be picked out from a particular population. So this sampling method comes under probability sampling. The difference being that there is the likelihood of them being chosen up only once. The same sample cannot be repeated again for the purpose of population. So this sampling method, it is also at times called as method of chances, because the luck or probability is majorly taken up for this particular type of sampling. Now there are certain steps to conduct simple random sampling. The researcher will have to make a list of the population based on those list, that is, the list would be based on a characteristics, and those characteristics whichever is better fitting the population, they will be assigned numbers to the individuals or items. The second step would be assigning a sequential numbers to those population items. The third step would be by the researcher to choose a sample. Like for example, if the population is 500, based on certain characteristics of maybe age or income group, the samples have been assigned sequential numbers. Then the researcher will determine from that population a sample size to be chosen. Like the sample size can be chosen from the population of 500, maybe around 250, and the researcher will be assigning all 500 population a sequential number. Third step would be based on the size, that is 250 samples is required by the researcher. Then the researcher can take up a system of random number generator device to pick up any number. So it's more like based on chance or probability of getting your luck drawn out from that particular population. So that way 250 numbers would be drawn up. That way 250 samples would be taken up from the population of 500 individuals. Like method of lottery. So method of lottery is one such example of sampling. So herein the lottery method is quite the oldest method for selection purpose of a particular sample. So herein the random people would be taken up the numbers, and they may have, then the researcher will draw up a random number from those particular boxes. So it's like lottery system. Whoever numbers gets picked up would be a part of research as a sample. Second main point under probability sampling is systematic sampling. So systematic sampling, as the name suggests, would follow a much more better system of approach towards collection of sample by way of determining the population, dividing the population into different sections, okay, that is the sample size. So the division can be based on intervals, like for example, where the researcher may choose up the elements by based on selection of random starting point. Say for example, from the researcher wants to collect a sample of 100 individuals from a population of say around 200, he only wants 100 individuals. So the method employed here could be systematic sampling, wherein the researcher may take up the sample by way of determining an interval. Now herein the interval can be based on random selection by the researcher. He will be setting a starting point and an ending point. The ending point would be the last 100 size, that is the 100 sample size number. So here the starting point can be maybe the number 6, as the example suggests. Like for example, the company, all employees of a company are assigned an alphabetical number or an order. From the first 10 numbers, the researcher may pick up any random number, say for example 6, and from starting from that number 6, any 10 number further would be selected. So starting from 6, the next 10th person would be selected. So 6 individual having the number 6, then the individual having the number 16, same way next 10 the individual having the number 26, 36 and so on. So here the interval of 10 is selected by the researcher, and the starting point taken by him is the 6th number. Same way there is, as per the researcher, as per his convenience also, he can take up any other starting number also. Like from a 1 to 10 series, starting from there he can take up the number 2, and from number 2 any 10th person. So 2 later on, then 12th. This way the condition can be set forth. Either the condition can be this way based on the 10th individual, or the condition can have specification starting from the number 6th to the next 10th person after 10th number. So, 2, then instead of 2 we can take up 13 that way instead of 12. So, systematic sampling is totally up to the researcher based on the intervals that he is going to draw up. So, systematic sampling can look like this, in which the system is in such a way that the intervals are drawn up by the researcher. Next, cluster sampling. So, cluster sampling is also called as area sampling. Herein the researcher can divide up the population into specific clusters, sections or areas that may represent a particular population, like such as a particular region, like for example the first street, the second street, the third street. This way also, based on different areas, the researcher can draw up a sample from a particular population. From a particular state also, researcher can draw up different districts. Like in cluster sampling, for example, if United States government wishes to evaluate number of immigrants living in the mainland US, then they can divide the clusters based on the states such as California, Texas, Florida, Colorado, Hawaii, etc. So, in this way the cluster sampling works, wherein the area has to be determined by the researcher for the purpose of sampling. Stratified sampling. So, stratified sampling is a much better and systematic approach also in under probability sampling. Herein the researcher divides the population into smaller groups, and these groups do not overlap each other. So, like for example, the researcher may want to determine the income generation of a particular group under the research study. So, the annual income of the family can be divided into different stratas. So, this strata can be less than $20,000, $21,000 to $30,000, $31,000 to $40,000, and $41,000 to $50,000. So, if you see, the strata does not have overlapping income criteria. Herein the main aspect is to ensure that the stratas do not overlap with each other. So, income, this particular criteria for under study can be utilized by the marketers also to determine the income level of different households. So, in such way different business people can utilize different techniques of sampling for the purpose of their surveys. So, stratified sampling can look like this based on strata. Now, this strata can not just be income, it can be other characteristics, it can be age group also, it can be even the occupation also. So, strata can be different aspects also. Now, the second part is non-probability sampling, in that the very first is convenience sampling. Under convenience sampling, the researcher will be drawing up the samples based on his or her convenience. So, convenience sampling is much more unsystematic way of approaching the individuals or items or objects for the purpose of research study. So, under convenience sampling, one of the example can be like the researcher may be recruiting the friends for the purpose of his research study. Like for example, you are researching about the student support service in your university. So, after each of your classes, you ask your fellow students to complete a survey on the topic. Now, this is a convenient way maybe for a student researcher to gather up information for the purpose of his research. So, convenience sampling is more like maybe you are knowing the person and you are approaching them to help with your research study to be a part of the sample for the purpose of data collection. So, this is very conveniently done by the researcher, and it does not follow a predefined characteristics or processes to be undertaken by the researcher. So, convenience sampling is more like the researcher may be having some few people close by him and from a particular population, and then he is deriving out the sample from the people who is under his close proximity. Accidental sampling is a method in which it does not follow any kind of a systematic process. Again, accidentally means you can just approach a particular individual on a street also with whom you do not have connection, with whom you do not with whom you do not even know, to gather up information. Like for example, you must have seen in shopping mall or even at street also people approaching you to gather information about maybe a particular product or service, asking about your opinions. This particular system is accidental sampling. So for instance, a person who is obtaining opinions for a political poll at a shopping mall by randomly selecting passerbys. So this is nothing but accidental form of sampling, which you will find a lot common in marketing. So in this way, the researcher takes up the samples, directly approaching them to collect the data. The difference between accidental sampling and convenience sampling is that in convenience sampling, the researcher is approaching the people who are in his proximity, close proximity, and at least he has some information or knowledge about the people with whom he is approaching for the purpose of becoming a sample. Whereas in accidental sampling, he is directly approaching someone unknown to him. Judgmental or purposive sampling. So judgmental or purposive sampling is based on the researcher's ability to judge a particular object, item or an individual. Like the researcher will be taking up this particular method of sampling based on his qualitative aspect. Like based on the qualitative aspect of the items or objects, he will decide. He will make a judgment whether to recruit a particular person for the sampling purpose or not. So like an example, if the researcher wants to investigate the study habits of 100 students in a class, he may exercise his own judgment and choose 10 students based on his opinions. Like this situation happens, like you are just trying to collect general information out of the students also, or maybe it is done for a particular research purpose also. So herein, under judgmental or purposive sampling, you are approaching someone with a determined way in which you are wanting to collect the information. So herein it's based on the researcher's judgment to understand the individual and object. So herein the researcher's bias can be one of the problem, because from a particular population he is only taking up the sample about whom he has a knowledge, and he is passing up the judgment whether that particular sample is suitable for his study or not. Quota sampling. So quota sampling is based on set standards to be taken up for the research study purpose. So quota would be based on specific attributes of an individual or an item. Like for example, maybe a cigarette company wants to find out what age group prefers what brand of cigarettes. So they may set up a quota. That quota can be the age group, like 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50 and 51 plus. So from this base, the researcher is deriving out a sample. The base would be the quota. The quota is the age group. Now if you see stratified sampling and quota sampling, both of them have the same kind of notion to take up the samples based on characteristics. The difference is that under stratified sampling, it's much more systematic approach towards it, whereas under quota sampling, the system is not well defined. It's based on quota, but this quota can also have characteristics, okay, behavioral characteristics attached to it, not just numerical. So that's difference. Now lastly, snowball or chain referral sampling. So snowball or chain referral sampling is utilized when the researcher is unable to access a population also. Like the researcher has a population set up from where he can take up the samples, but this particular population doesn't have all the characteristics which matches up to the requirement of his research study. So what the researcher can do? The researcher will have to derive the sample. To search up the sample from a population which is not suitable for the research study, the researcher will have to go to further lengths also. Herein the researcher will try to first of all identify at least few individuals or items which matches the criteria of the research study. In the snowball or chain referral sampling, this method is only undertaken when the sample is very hard to find out. Herein, the researcher takes up a technique, recruitment technique, in which first he recruits an initial sample, and that initial sample is given the task to recruit additional samples. Now if you see, this is what it looks like. Snowball sampling, researcher will recruit initial subjects based on the characteristics. Since the sample is very hard to find out, the researcher will also ask his initial individuals or samples to recruit further individuals, that is the samples, who fits under the criteria of research study. Like for example, maybe the researcher is taking up the research study of people having rare blood group. So herein the researcher may be able to find out initial individuals with those particular characteristics. Now to further identify people with rare blood groups, the researcher may have to take help from the initial recruiters to further identify the next batch of samples. So in this way the researcher can fully identify the required sample size. So that's it for today's session. Thank you everyone.